In the blink of an ordinary morning, destiny interrupted a quiet trail when Mark Stevens, an experienced 42-year-old firefighter who cherished his weekend jogs, stumbled upon a scene that froze him in his tracks. A wild Mustang, once proud and free, now lying battered in the dirt, its body barely clinging to life. Alone in the vast wilderness with no one to call upon, the injured animal faced an impossible fate, and every second that followed would irrevocably change both its future and Mark's. The early sun filtered through a dense forest, its golden rays illuminating the winding dirt path where Mark had run countless weekends. As he rounded a bend near a shallow creek, a subtle movement caught his eye. Initially, he assumed it was nothing more than a fallen tree limb swaying in the gentle breeze, but as he advanced, the unmistakable outline of a large animal emerged, and his heart sank. There, sprawled in the dirt, was a Mustang whose labored breaths and heaving sides betrayed the brink of death. Mark slowed his pace. His first responder instincts immediately took over as he crouched at a safe distance. His trained eyes assessed every detail. The Mustang's once rich chestnut coat was now caked in dirt and stained with blood, its legs were marred by deep scratches, and its left hind limb was swollen, likely sprained or broken. The creature's head rested in the mud, its dark eyes glassy yet filled with palpable fear. "Softly," Mark said. "Hey, buddy," his calm, steady voice chosen with care so as not to startle the injured wild animal. At his gentle greeting, the Mustang flinched, its ears flicking weakly. Patiently, Mark remained motionless, allowing the Mustang to grow accustomed to his presence while his mind raced with questions. How had such a magnificent creature come to suffer so terribly? And what could he possibly do to help? The forest was eerily silent. The usual chorus of birds and rustling leaves had been replaced by the animal's shallow, uneven breathing. Mark scanned his surroundings for any sign of what might have caused these injuries. A predator's attack, a fall, or perhaps human interference, but found nothing except the tracks of horses leading upward along the rocky incline above the creek. His gaze returned to the Mustang, whose chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, each ragged breath a testament to its struggle. A pang of helplessness struck him. Unlike a domestic animal, a wild Mustang would instinctively fear human contact, risking further harm if mishandled. Yet, leaving it behind was not an option. Reaching for his phone, Mark cursed under his breath when he discovered there was no signal. Of course, help was out of reach this far into the wilderness. "All right, Mark," he muttered to himself, "you're on your own." Weighing his limited options, he realized that carrying the injured animal was out of the question and that moving it abruptly might worsen its injuries. Instead, he resolved to stabilize it. Glancing around, his eyes fell on a patch of tall grass beside a nearby stream. Removing his jacket, he approached slowly, using the pocket knife he always kept to cut through the grass. He then dipped the blades into the cool water to fashion a makeshift compress. "Easy, buddy," he murmured, inching closer as the Mustang's ears twitched and it struggled to shift its weight, only to tremble from the effort. With deliberate, measured movements designed to avoid spooking the fragile animal, Mark pressed the damp grass against the swollen leg, feeling the tense muscles beneath his touch. To his surprise, the Mustang did not lash out. Instead, its eyes briefly met his, a look that mingled trust with a desperate plea for help. Hour by hour, Mark worked to cleanse the Mustang's wounds using water drawn from the stream and then draped his jacket over the injured form to offer warmth. Although its breaths remained shallow and labored, the animal did not resist his careful ministrations. As the sun began its slow descent behind the treetops, Mark recognized that a decision had to be made. The Mustang could not be left exposed overnight, not with lurking predators and plummeting temperatures. Glancing toward the path that led to his truck, parked nearly 3 miles away, he realized he had no rope, no trailer, no supplies, only his determination and a faint hope that he could save this creature. "I'm not leaving you," he declared firmly, as the Mustang blinked and drew another shallow breath, a silent sign that spurred him on. In that critical moment, Mark resolved to find a way, no matter how impossible it might seem. He studied the injured Mustang, the weight of the moment pressing heavily upon him, and wondered how he could possibly transport a creature of this size across rugged terrain without proper equipment. Every rational thought screamed that it was a losing battle, yet a deeper, stubborn instinct would not let him abandon the animal. "All right, buddy," he whispered softly while crouching near the Mustang's head, "we're going to get you out of here one step at a time." Once more, he fished his phone from his pocket, clinging to the hope that a stray signal might appear, but there was none. With a resigned sigh, he scanned the area, the dense forest offering little in resources, until he noticed a large, sturdy branch lying nearby. If he could rig up a makeshift sled, It might provide a fighting chance to move the Mustang. Determined, Mark set to work, stripping his jacket and shirt into long strips to use as ties. He propped the branch under the animal's body and looped the improvised straps around its midsection, careful not to tighten them excessively. The Mustang twitched slightly but did not resist, its energy too depleted for a struggle. In that moment, Mark's thoughts briefly turned to Rosie, his faithful border collie at home, who always seemed to sense when he needed encouragement. "Looks like it's just you and me today," he said softly to the Mustang, a faint smile touching his lips as the creature's dark eyes blinked slowly in response. Taking a deep, resolute breath, Mark gritted his teeth and said, "All right, let's do this," before pushing firmly against the branch. Testing its weight, he found that it barely budged. His heart sank momentarily, but he refused to give up. Adjusting the angle, he wedged a flat stone under the branch for extra leverage and tried again. This time, the branch shifted slightly, the snow beneath the Mustang easing the drag just enough. "Good boy," Mark muttered more to himself than to the animal as he moved a few feet forward, planting his boots firmly in the snow before pulling once again. The branch creaked under the strain but held, and slowly, inch by painstaking inch, he began dragging the Mustang toward the trail. The effort was grueling. Mark's muscles burned and his breath came in short bursts visible in the frosty air, while the Mustang moaned softly, its head tilting uncertainly as if questioning whether to trust the process. Frequently, Mark paused to check its breathing and adjust the makeshift straps. By the time they reached the first bend in the trail, the sun was dipping low, casting long, dramatic shadows across the forest floor. Exhaustion overwhelmed his legs, yet the distant sight of his truck, a mere speck along the path, kept him moving, even if only to reassure both himself and the wounded Mustang. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted. Mark's raw hands, chafed from gripping the branch, and his bare torso, exposed in the cold, shivered against the biting wind. He paused briefly to cover the Mustang with his jacket, his teeth chattering as he muttered, "You're not the only one freezing out here, you know." The Mustang weakly lifted its head, its ears flicking at the sound of his voice, prompting a soft chuckle from Mark. "I'll take that as a thank you." Their arduous journey continued as memories of his childhood surfaced. Memories of a quiet, strong father who had taught him to respect both animals and the land, lessons that now resonated more deeply than ever as he trudged through the snow with a half-alive Mustang. His father had often said that nature would teach you more than you could ever teach it, and though Mark had once taken those words lightly, now they carried profound meaning. By the time they reached his truck, every fiber of Mark's body screamed for rest. He unlatched the tailgate and, summoning every ounce of strength, maneuvered the branch into position to slide the Mustang into the truck's bed. The horse's foamy breaths quickened with the effort, yet Mark continued to stroke its neck in a steady, soothing tone. "You're safe now. We're almost there." Climbing into the driver's seat, he cranked up the heat and stole a glance at the Mustang in the rearview mirror, its eyes half closed but its chest rising and falling steadily. Exhaling deeply, his trembling hands gripped the wheel as he murmured, "Hang in there. We're not done yet." The drive back to his ranch became a blur as the winding mountain roads, treacherous even in daylight, turned perilous in the dark, with snow flurries dancing across the windshield and the truck's tires occasionally slipping on icy patches. His knuckles whitened as he alternated his gaze between the road ahead and the Mustang secured in the truck bed, whose shallow yet steady breaths testified to its fragile state. Mark had carefully secured the animal with blankets and rope, improvising a method to keep it from sliding with every sharp turn. Finally, as the familiar silhouette of his barn emerged against the snowy backdrop, relief flooded him. Pulling into the driveway, the crunch of tires on the gravel broke the silence. Despite the cold biting at his skin, adrenaline spurred him on as he lowered the tailgate and softly said to the Mustang, "We're here, buddy, just a little more." Unloading the horse proved slow and painstaking. Mark had prepared a spacious stall in the barn, lining it with fresh straw and setting up a heat lamp to combat the frigid air. Using an old sled, he maneuvered the Mustang into the barn, each step testing his endurance. By the time the animal was settled, sweat dripped from his back despite the freezing temperature. The Mustang lay quietly in the straw, its chest rising and falling with visible effort, while Mark crouched beside it to assess its injuries in the better light of the barn. The swelling in its hind leg was severe, and several raw, inflamed gashes marred its flank, wounds that looked less like the result of a simple fall and more like the claw marks of a mountain lion. "Mountain lion," he muttered under his breath, the realization sending a chill down his spine. Though he had seen tracks in the area before, He had never come so close to evidence of an attack. If the Mustang had been ambushed, it was nothing short of miraculous that it had survived. Rosie, his loyal border collie, trotted into the barn, her nose twitching as she sniffed the air and let out a low whine while fixing her gaze on the Mustang. "Yeah, girl," Mark said, gently running his hand over her head. "This one's been through hell." Determinedly, he grabbed his first aid kit and set to work, carefully cleaning the wounds despite his exhaustion. The Mustang flinched occasionally but did not resist, as if it understood that Mark's care was meant to save it. He applied antiseptic to its gashes and wrapped the swollen leg with a clean bandage. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to suffice until a veterinarian could reach the ranch. As the hours passed, the Mustang began to relax, resting its head on the straw while Mark sank onto his heels, his body aching but his heart lighter. "You're a fighter," he murmured softly. For a fleeting moment, the Mustang's dark eyes met his, and Mark thought he saw gratitude in their depths. In a nearby stall, a soft nicker reminded him of the many horses he had rescued over the years, his ranch a haven for abandoned dogs, stray cats, and even a deer with a broken leg. Yet this Mustang was different, wild, untamed, and its survival felt like a deeply personal victory. That night, Mark barely slept. He dozed off in the barn, leaning against a bale of hay with Rosie curled up at his side, every creak of the barn door and rustle of straw keeping him on edge as if another threat might emerge. But the night passed without incident, and by morning the Mustang's breathing had steadied. Stepping outside into the crisp air, Mark inhaled deeply as the snow-covered landscape sparkled beneath the rising sun. For the first time in days, a glimmer of hope warmed him, even as the nagging thought remained that the mountain lion might still be out there, determined to protect its territory. Resolutely, Mark spent the day fortifying the barn, reinforcing doors, installing motion sensor lights, and even setting up a trail camera to monitor any activity. Although he knew these measures would not stop a determined predator, they were better than nothing. Then, that evening, as he checked on the Mustang, he noticed something remarkable. Though still weak, the animal had lifted its head and was nibbling on the hay, a small sign of progress that filled Mark with renewed determination. "You're not just surviving," he whispered. With a soft murmur, he whispered, "You're fighting," as he sat beside the stall with Rosie curled at his feet. Mark made a silent vow that, no matter the cost, he would see this Mustang recover. They had come too far to give up now. The following morning, cold and clear with the crisp scent of fresh snow in the air, Mark stood outside the barn. His breath formed visible puffs as he sipped his coffee and scanned the tree line, his senses heightened by the attack marks that haunted him, a constant reminder that danger still lurked in the wilderness surrounding his ranch. Suddenly, Rosie barked sharply, her tail rigid as she stared toward the dense woods. "What is it, girl?" Mark asked, setting his mug aside and reaching for the rifle kept by the barn door. Rosie growled low, her ears pinned back. Squinting into the shadows of the trees, Mark saw nothing at first but the familiar expanse of snow and pines, until movement caught his eye. A sleek figure darted between the trees, its golden fur catching the sunlight. Mark's stomach dropped. It was a mountain lion. The predator halted at the forest's edge, its piercing eyes locked on the barn. Mark's grip on the rifle tightened. He had no doubt what the creature wanted. The injured Mustang was an easy target, and the lion was likely responsible for its wounds. As Rosie's growl deepened, the lion flicked its tail, muscles tense as if weighing whether to advance or to stay back. "Stay back," Mark muttered, raising his rifle and aiming just above the animal. A warning shot rang out, echoing through the still morning air. The lion flinched yet did not flee immediately. Its gaze lingered on the barn before shifting to Mark. Finally, with a low growl, it turned and melted back into the forest, its golden coat disappearing among the trees. Mark exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping with relief. Though the encounter had left him shaken, the lion knew where the Mustang was and would not easily give up. Back inside the barn, Mark checked on the Mustang as it stirred yet remained calm. Stroking its neck, he murmured reassurances, "We'll keep you safe," in a resolute tone. That night, Mark barely slept, his mind racing with plans to protect the Mustang. As the first light of dawn crept through the barn windows, he realized he was not merely fighting for the horse's survival but for its freedom. The sunrise painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, though Mark scarcely noticed as he stood at the edge of the barnyard, staring at the tree line where the mountain lion had disappeared the night before. The previous encounter had left him rattled, yet he could not let fear take hold. The Mustang's survival and its freedom depended on him. Inside, the Mustang stirred. As Mark approached, It lifted its head weakly, its dark eyes meeting his in a flicker of recognition. "You're tougher than you look," he said softly while crouching beside it to check the bandages. The swelling in its leg had diminished slightly, and the gashes on its flank looked cleaner. Progress, though the horse was still in danger. As Mark worked, Rosie barked urgently outside. Tensing, he wiped his hands on his jeans before stepping out. Rosie stood near the fence, her body rigid and gaze fixed on something distant. Following her line of sight, Mark's breath caught when he spotted movement in the snow, a figure emerging from the woods. It was not the mountain lion, but a man in a heavy coat carrying a rifle over his shoulder. Immediately, Mark recognized him as Jim Barnes, a local hunter who often roamed the area. Mark's stomach tightened. He recalled past clashes with Jim over wild Mustangs, with Jim arguing they were a nuisance to ranchers and wildlife alike. "What brings you out here, Jim?" Mark called, his voice calm but firm as the hunter approached. Jim stopped at the fence, his expression unreadable. "Morning, Mark. I heard some shots last night. Thought I'd come check it out." Mark folded his arms and maintained a steady gaze, silently keeping the mountain lion at bay. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said. Jim's eyes narrowed. "Mountain lion, huh? Dangerous business. You sure it's safe keeping animals in that barn of yours?" A spark of anger flared in Mark's chest. "They're fine, thanks for your concern." Leaning against the fence, Jim's gaze drifted toward the barn. "Word gets around, Mark. People are saying you've got a Mustang in there, a wild one." Mark's jaw tightened. "What I do on my property is my business." Jim chuckled, though there was no warmth in his tone. "Wild Mustangs don't belong here, Mark. They're a threat to livestock, a drain on resources. You're better off letting nature take its course." Stepping closer, Mark said in a low, steady voice, "That horse is injured, and I'm not letting it die out here because of people like you." Jim's smile faded, his expression hardening. "Suit yourself, but don't come crying to me when that lion finishes the job," he warned before turning and walking away, disappearing back into the woods. Mark watched him go, his fists clenching at his sides. The encounter left him uneasy, certain that Jim was not one to let go easily. Inside the barn, the Mustang lay quietly, its breathing steady, as Mark stroked its neck while his mind raced with plans to get the horse to safety, somewhere far from both predators and people like Jim. Yet moving it in its condition was risky, and the nearest Mustang sanctuary was hours away. That afternoon, Mark called the sanctuary and explained the situation to a woman named Claire who ran the facility. She listened intently, her voice calm and reassuring. "We can take the Mustang, but you'll need to bring it here. Our transport is tied up with another rescue." Mark glanced at the horse, its injured leg extended in the straw, and replied, "I'll figure it out." "Thank you." After hanging up, Mark began preparing for the journey. He fortified the trailer by lining it with straw and adding padding to protect the Mustang during the ride. He packed medical supplies, food, and water, knowing the trip would be grueling for both of them. As evening fell, Mark stood in the barn with his hands resting on the stall door, and the Mustang looked at him with dark, calm but weary eyes. "We're leaving tomorrow," he said softly. "It's going to be tough, but we'll get through it." Rosie barked again with a sharp tone that cut through the quiet, and Mark's heart sank as he stepped outside and saw fresh tracks in the snow, boot prints leading toward the barn. His stomach churned. Jim had been there. Mark tightened his grip on the rifle as he scanned the area, but the woods were silent. Whoever had been there was gone, yet the message was clear. The Mustang was threatened not only by nature but by people. Back inside the barn, Mark leaned against the stall, his resolve hardening. "No one's taking you," he whispered to the Mustang, "not while I'm here." As the wind howled outside, Mark settled in for another long night, his rifle within reach and his determination stronger than ever. In the still dark hours before dawn, Mark loaded the Mustang into the trailer. The horse, weak but cooperative as if it understood that this journey was its only chance at survival, was secured carefully. Methodically, Mark spoke softly to calm the animal, and in a nearby stall a soft whinny, almost a protest, echoed. He reassured it with a gentle stroke before closing the trailer door. Rosie sat by the truck, her ears alert as she scanned the surroundings. Mark double-checked the straps securing the Mustang and took a deep breath. There was no time to waste, as every minute spent increased the risk of another visit from either the mountain lion or Jim Barnes. The truck's engine roared to life, and Mark guided it down the snowy driveway. The weight of the trailer slowed the journey, and the icy roads demanded his full attention. Rosie, sitting in the passenger seat with her head resting on his lap, provided a quiet source of comfort as the sun began to rise. The forest around them came alive. Snow sparkled on branches, and the distant call of birds broke the morning silence for a brief moment. Mark allowed himself to believe they might reach the sanctuary without incident, but that hope was short-lived. Halfway down the mountain, the truck spun, jerking violently. Mark's stomach sank as the engine warning light flickered on. "No, no, no," he muttered, pulling over to the side of the road. Steam hissed from under the hood as he climbed out, his boots crunching in the snow while he opened the hood, the acrid smell of overheating coolant filling the air. Rosie barked sharply, her body tense as she stared down the road. Following her gaze, Mark's heart skipped a beat when he saw a familiar truck approaching. Jim Barnes, the hunter, had pulled up beside his vehicle with a smirk on his face. "Having some trouble, Carter?" Jim called as he stepped out of his truck, his rifle slung over his shoulder and boots crunching ominously in the snow. Approaching Mark, he straightened his fists and clenched his sides. "What do you want, Jim?" Mark demanded. Jim glanced at the trailer, his smirk widening. "Told you before, wild Mustangs don't belong here. You're just making things harder for yourself." Mark stepped in front of the trailer protectively. "This horse is headed to a sanctuary, and you're not stopping me." Jim chuckled darkly, his hand resting on his rifle. "Oh, awfully stubborn for a man without options," he retorted. Rosie growled low, her body tense as she positioned herself between Mark and Jim. The tension in the air was palpable, the quiet of the forest amplifying every sound. "I don't want any trouble," Mark said steadily, though anger simmered beneath his calm tone. "I'm not letting you near that horse." Jim's smirk faded, his expression hardening. "Suit yourself," he said coldly, "but don't come crying to me when that lion finishes the job." With that, he turned and walked back to his truck, but Mark did not relax. He knew Jim would not let this go easily. As the hunter drove away, Mark quickly returned to his truck and checked the engine, realizing the damage was not something he could fix on the roadside. Time was slipping away, and the sanctuary was still hours off. In desperation, Mark made a decision. He unhitched the trailer and tied it securely to the truck to keep it stable. With Rosie by his side, he opened the trailer door and gently coaxed the Mustang out. "We're walking," he said softly, stroking the horse's neck. "It's not ideal, but it's our only choice." The path ahead was treacherous, the snow was deep and the cold biting. Mark led the Mustang slowly, careful not to strain its injured leg, while Rosie stayed close, her keen senses alert for any sign of danger. Hours passed as they made their way through the forest. Mark's muscles ached and the cold seeped into his bones, yet he refused to stop. The Mustang stumbled occasionally, but Mark was there to steady it with constant reassurances. Approaching the forest's edge, a low, menacing growl made Mark's blood run cold. He turned slowly, his heart pounding, and saw the mountain lion emerging from the trees, its golden eyes fixed on the Mustang. Rosie barked furiously, placing herself between the predator and the horse. With trembling hands, Mark raised his rifle and commanded, "Stay back," in a firm voice. The lion hesitated, its body low and tense, growling again as it inched closer, its gaze never leaving its prey. Mark knew he had only seconds to act. He fired a shot into the air, the sound echoing through the forest. The lion flinched but did not retreat as it prepared to pounce. Rosie lunged, barking and snapping at its heels, giving Mark the opening he needed. He fired another shot, this time hitting the ground near the lion with a final growl, and the predator retreated, disappearing back into the shadows. Collapsing to his knees, his chest heaving with relief, Mark turned to the Mustang and, stroking its neck, whispered, "We're almost there." As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Mark, the Mustang, and Rosie emerged from the forest. Golden rays bathed the snow-covered ground in a soft glow, casting long shadows as they approached the sanctuary's entrance. Exhaustion weighed on Mark's shoulders, yet the sight of the sanctuary, a sprawling property surrounded by rolling hills and sturdy fences, filled him with renewed hope. Then a woman in her mid-40s, bundled in a thick coat, stepped out of the main building. Her name was Claire, the sanctuary's director, and her face lit up as she saw them. "You made it," she said warmly. Her voice rang out, warm and inviting, as Mark nodded with a tight, emotional throat. He glanced at the Mustang standing beside him, Its breathing was labored yet steady. "We did it," he murmured softly. Claire approached with calm, deliberate steps, reaching out to the Mustang and allowing the horse to sniff her hand before she gently stroked its neck. "What a beauty!" she murmured. Her eyes then shifted to the bandages on its injured leg, and her expression grew solemn. "Let's get it inside," she insisted, guided by a gentle authority. Mark led the Mustang into a spacious, well-lit barn where warmth contrasted the cold outside. Hay covered the floors and the scent of grain filled the air. He guided the horse into a stall while Claire examined its wounds. "You've done an amazing job keeping this horse alive," she said with admiration, remarking that few could have saved it. Mark, leaning against the door with trembling legs, admitted, "I couldn't leave it out there. It deserved a chance." Meanwhile, Rosie sat loyally at his feet, and the Mustang watched Claire with quiet trust as Mark felt proud of the creature's progress since its rescue. The barn's soft lighting and gentle hum of warmth provided a stark contrast to the harsh winter outside, and every detail spoke of care and safety. In that moment, both man and animal shared a silent understanding, a bond formed through struggle and hope. Indeed, profound bonding. Mark exhaled deeply, the tension that had gripped him for days finally easing. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Claire placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You are the one who saved it. You gave it a chance when no one else would." Mark then spent several hours at the sanctuary, assisting Claire and her team as they settled the Mustang into its new home. The horse received fresh water, a warm blanket, and a quiet place to rest. Mark stayed by its side, softly speaking as he stroked its neck. The bond they formed over those days felt unbreakable, truly beyond measure. When it was time to leave, Mark stood at the stall door with his hand on the wood. "You're safe now," he whispered. "Take care, buddy." The Mustang lifted its head, its dark eyes meeting his one final time. Mark smiled faintly, feeling both sadness and relief. He turned to Claire, who nodded reassuringly, promising they would care for it with heartfelt true, absolute certainty. As Mark walked back to his truck, Rosie trotted beside him, and the weight on his chest began to lift. The Mustang was safe, and its journey was just beginning. Mark climbed into the driver's seat, glancing back at the sanctuary one last time before departing. The long road home was filled with memories of the past days and the Mustang's remarkable resilience against all odds. Every mile reminded him of the strength found in compassion and the unspoken bond between a rescuer and his noble charge that endures forever. As Mark pulled into his driveway, the first flakes of snowfall began to drift down. He stepped out of the truck, Rosie at his side, and gazed at the ranch. Life went on as always, but Mark knew he would never forget the Mustang or the lessons it taught him. Even the smallest act of kindness could change a life, and sometimes change your own. As he drove away, a deep fulfillment filled his heart, affirming the power of compassion. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share to spread hope if you may.